Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. On behalf of the entire team at Manage Engine AD Solutions involved with hosting today's webinar, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for taking time off your busy schedules for joining us today. Right, so before we get started, just a couple of routine things. I just want to ensure that there's no issue with my audio. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. And I hope you have no issues with viewing my shared screen as well. Right, so in case you have any difficulties either now or over the course of the webinar, do reach out to us on the live chat option on your GoToWebinar panel, and our tech support team will help sort out any issues. Right, so apart from that, I'm also joined by Bruce from our pre-sales team, and he's here to answer your questions that you may have over the course of the webinar, right? So the point is, make use of the live chat option on the GoToWebinar panel and keep asking us your questions as and when you have any concerns that you want addressed, right? And if time permits, at the end of the webinar, I can do a live Q&A as well, where you can shoot out your questions and I can answer them for the benefit of the entire audience. Right, so just those two things. In case you have any issues with the technical aspect, the shared screen and the audio, let us know. And as and when you have questions, do make use of us, do make use of Bruce on the live chat, and keep your interactions as high as possible, because that's the whole point of doing these live events, right? So just another small housekeeping thing, which is that we'll be sending you the recording of today's session, the video recording of today's webinar via email within a day or two, right? So you'll have that in a day or two if you want to share it with any of your colleagues. Right, so without any further ado, I think everything is fine with the setup, right? We've got a couple of people letting us know that everything is good and it's good and we're good to start. Right, so here's the agenda for today's session. We're essentially today going to be looking at security auditing and SIEM, right? Security information and event management. We're going to start off with the basics and just look at why we need SIEM in our IT security program. We're going to just go over some very basic SIEM concepts that a lot of us do know, but often overlook, right? So that's how we're going to get started with today's session. And then we're going to look at more specific cases, right? More specific details that will help you either get more out of your current SIEM solution that you're using, or help you in case you're looking at evaluating a SIEM solution for your environment, right? So we look at certain reports that you want to run, right? What kinds of events you want to track, what kinds of reports you want to generate on a daily basis. We look at examples for that. We'll also look at examples of alerting scenarios, right? We look at cases where you want to set up security alerts, right? And we look at how you can exactly set up these alerts using a SIEM solution. I'll also show you a use case for event correlation, right? So that's another SIEM concept that we'll be looking at in today's webinar. And then I'm going to be talking about what we do once we encounter a security incident, right? Because as we all know, a SIEM solution essentially is going to help us detect security incidents or detect issues, right? So once that issue is detected, how the SIEM solution can still be leveraged in order to streamline the process of efficiently responding to the incident, right? So we look at that side of it as well. And we'll wrap up finally by looking at some of the latest trends in SIEM, right? In terms of what kinds of technologies, right? We hear a lot about machine learning and statistical analysis and things like that. We look at how those technologies are influencing the new age SIEM solutions, right? In terms of what kinds of capabilities these new technologies are able to provide for your SIEM solutions. Right, so this is essentially the agenda that we have planned. In general, I'll try to keep the content of the webinar pretty generic in terms of this would be applicable irrespective of whether or not you're using Manage Engine SIEM solution. But as and when possible, I'll also try to jump into Manage Engine Log360, which is our SIEM offering, so that I can show you and illustrate some of the things that we're going to be discussing. Right, so in case you have any product-specific questions, or in case you're a user of Log360, or in case you're evaluating Log360, do ask those questions on the live chat as and when you get them. right? So, and most importantly, and I like to say this always during our live events, which is that in case you feel that you want to discuss something other than what's written in this webinar agenda slide, do reach out to us on the live chat, because in the past we've actually added those topics, if feasible, along with the presentation, right? So if you want to talk about something very specific, and if it's relevant to the overall theme of the webinar, I can very well, if that's something that I know pretty well, I can definitely share my inputs on that for the benefits of the entire audience, right? So this is what we have planned. So let's get started, and I'm going to get started by showing you a simple use case, right? I'm going to get started with today's session by showing you this scenario, right? So let's see if you guys can relate to this problem, right? So think of this scenario where John is a regular end user from your sales department, right? And John, for whatever reason, we're not going to get into that, but for whatever reason, John is added to the domain admins group in Active Directory, right? Let's not think about whether it was someone, an insider attack, or or the administrator colluding with John and doing this, or John gaining unauthorized access, or anything of that sort. Assume that in your organization, John, a regular end user from your sales team, is added to the domain admins group in Active Directory, right? So is this a problem? Would you say that this is a deviation from your normal security policies or normal security baseline, right? So, yep, a couple of you have already said on the live chat that yes, this is obviously a problem, right? Very straightforward. I'm sure all of you agree with me that this scenario of an end user being added to your domain admins group in Active Directory is going to cause a problem, right? It's going to cause a problem to your security baseline, because John now gets unrestricted access to all the resources in your network, right? So this is a huge problem. And if something like this happens, this needs to be reverted, because it can otherwise lead to a whole lot of issues with regards to compliance, and John could well carry out a data exfiltration kind of attack, right? So the reason I showed you this scenario is because to detect something like this happening, you actually have the means to do so, right? You actually have the means. In the case of Active Directory, you actually have the Windows security logs, which can help you detect a scenario such as this, right? So you can see on this slide now that I've listed out 3 event IDs, right? So these event IDs are essentially parts of your log messages, right? And each event ID corresponds to a particular kind of event, right? So you see these 3 event IDs, 4728, 4732, and 4756. Right, so it says 4728 is member added to a security enabled global group. Member added to a security enabled local group is 4732, and then member added to security enabled universal group is 4756. Right, so essentially, if you're able to track these logs for these event IDs in your Active Directory environment, you essentially are able to track the addition of members to security groups, right? Which is to say that you're tracking group membership changes, right? So I wanted to give this example to really tell you how powerful your log data is, that is the log data generated in your environment is, and how if you know exactly what to look for and exactly what to track in your environment, you can detect misuse events such as the one you saw on the previous slide, right? So if you're tracking these event IDs, you're essentially tracking all of these group membership changes so that you are in a position to review these and know if everything is proper, or if something requires a change, or something needs to be reverted, right? So this is it. You need your logs. You need to make sense of your log data. And of course, being IT administrators or security professionals attending today's webinar, I can confidently say that you guys know this more than me, right? You guys know this more than us as vendors. You guys know the importance of log data. But unfortunately, we found when we discussed with our own customers and some of our prospects that a lot of the time, it's not the knowledge that log data is important that is lacking, but rather the knowledge to leverage log data that is lacking. right? Because all of us know, right? We all know. Now I tell you that 4728, 4732, 4756 is important. All of you are definitely agreeing with me on this. All of you are probably checking if this is possible in your environment to track the occurrence of these event IDs, right? So the problem arises because sometimes we are not sure how do we go about doing this, right? So that's what we're going to be looking at over these next few slides. Right. So the audit trail, we essentially call the collection of logs. Once we've collected all of the logs, we essentially call it the audit trail, right? And you being able to understand and analyze the audit trail is very, very important to be able to detect those kinds of misuse events, right? So I just have a slightly alternate definition for SIEM or for leverage, why we need to leverage the audit trail, right? And I say in a lot of my presentations that you need the audit trail to know answers to vital security questions, right? You need to know the answers to important security questions, such as the ones that you see on the screen, right? If at some point I come and ask you, who is accessing and modifying your critical files and folders, right? Which user accounts have been locked out and why have they been locked out? Were there any critical changes made to your domain controllers or your network devices, right? Your routers and switches and firewalls? Is there unusual activity on your database or web server, right? Is there privilege abuse or is there an attack like SQL injection? So when you want to know answers to these questions, your base reference is your audit trail, right? Because your audit trail essentially has the list of events that have taken place in your network. And to answer these questions, you essentially need to reference the audit trail and know these answers, right? So if you might well be thinking, especially if some of you have dealt with compliance audits in the past, this is very compliance audit like, right? The questions that you see on the screen, right? You need to know these things. You need to know who are the people accessing your file server, who are the people copying data from your file server, modifying personal data and things like that, right? So audit trail is needed to be able to answer these kinds of questions. And essentially, by leveraging a SIEM solution, your life becomes a whole lot easier. Because a SIEM solution helps you achieve these things, right? Because it's going to analyze the audit trail for you automatically based on some pre-built rules and other actions. And it's going to help you identify security events of interest, help you detect and respond to attacks in real time. And that is key here, real time. And it's also going to help you run reports for compliance audits, right? So a SIEM solution essentially is helping you to tap in to your audit trail, analyze your logs from your network, and help you answer those questions that you saw on the previous slide, right? So it's going to help you say at a given point, is there a SQL injection attack happening in your network right now, right? So it's obviously not, you're not going to ask a question to your SIEM solution, but rather what a SIEM solution can do is tell you that SQL injection has been detected on your database server, right? So this is the key here. So in case any of you were not fully sold for whatever reason on leveraging your logs and really making the most of this wonderful but age-old feature available in systems, now would be a good time for you to start thinking of, oh, okay, these logs are there in my network. What can I do with them? How can I use them to tighten my security program, right? Because this is going to help you not only to do these security things such as detecting and responding to attacks, but it's also going to help you run these reports, which you might otherwise be struggling to do for your compliance audits and internal audits. Right. So here is the next thing I want to discuss, which is what are my log sources, right? You know the logs are important. You know you need to collect logs. You need to feed these logs to your SIEM solution. But what exactly are your log sources, right? And this is the answer to that. The actual answer is that there's no hard and fast rule. because each environment might be very different. You might be using legacy systems in your environment, and you need to, of course, feed those logs into your SIM solution as well. But in general, barring those legacy systems that you might be using and some other custom applications, here is what you typically want to be looking at, right? When it comes to logs, here's what we typically see our customers concerned about. Workstations, end user workstations, servers, domain controllers, your firewalls, routers, switches, your IDS, IPS. You might have deployed endpoint security solutions, right? Your next gen antivirus and things like that. Those logs are important. Database logs, web server logs. And then, especially because it's 2018, your public cloud platforms as well also matter, right? Your Office 365 logs, your AWS or Azure logs, your Exchange Online and all of that. You're essentially trying to get logs from all of these different disjointed systems into a central location, right? So all of these logs, because there's no other way that these systems might be connected. There's no way your Office 365 log can, say, be connected to an Active Directory log, in terms of maybe the same user is performing an action in Office 365 as well as on your on-premise file server, right? So the only way you can actually connect these kinds of disjointed events is if you're able to aggregate the event data into a single location. And that is essentially what your SIM solution is doing, right? You're able to get logs from all of these different sources that concern you and pull them into a central repository so that you can then get the benefits of what a SIM solution does, right? The one that you saw on the previous slide: identifying security events, detecting attacks, running reports, right? So make a note of this if you're concerned about what kinds of systems you want to be monitoring, right? So this is a good starting point, right? Once you look at this, you can then look at listing out your custom applications and legacy systems. Right. So in short, what your SIM solution does, just summarizing what we've discussed so far, right? And after this, we will dive into specifics and look at specific things that we need to be tracking. Just want to ensure that we're just summarizing everything that we've seen so far neatly in a flowchart, right? So essentially what we got to do to leverage SIM is we first define an audit policy, right? So we first identify the systems that we want to monitor, right? So your log sources, you first make a list of all of that. And then you go to each of the log sources and define an audit policy, right? Which is to tell the system what events it needs to track, right? So because by default, system logging is disabled on most systems. So it's the duty of the administrator to go to the system and define a logging policy so that the system starts generating logs for the specified events, right? So for example, if I look at Windows, and I can actually very well go ahead and show you this on my own laptop, right? So if I just open the group policy editor, or in my case, since it's just a laptop, my local policy editor, you can actually see what I mean, right? So if any of you have worked with Windows servers, you may well be familiar with these security settings. So if I go to the audit policy folder, just a moment, if I just go to the local policies, the audit policy, you can essentially see here the different kinds of events that the system can log for you, right? So you see the logon events, the account management, directory service access, the object access, the policy change, the privilege use, and system events, and all of that, right? So you essentially can go and tell the system what it needs to track. So if you look at system events, you can enable auditing for both success and failure of this event. And once you've applied the setting, this system is then going to start generating logs for both success and failure system events, right? So in the case of Windows, of course, there's a neat trick where you can actually use the advanced audit policy settings so that you can granularly go and define or enable auditing for specific categories of events, right? So if you look at object access, you might not want to get logs for all the object access events, right? So you can just specifically go ahead and choose the specific subcategories of object access that you want to generate logs for. Right, so I'm not going to dive too much into this and deviate from the topic, but the reason why I showed this as an example was to tell you that this part is the part that you got to do manually, right? You've got to go and apply these settings. You got to go. You can of course push this via a GPO in the case of Windows, but what I mean is that you have to actually go ahead and apply these settings on your different machines, and so that those machines then start generating the logs for the specified event, right? So if you're maybe using Cisco or Fortinet or Barracuda network devices, you'd have to go to the console, the admin GUI console, and then specify logging for the specified set of events, right? So each time you specify the logging, you're essentially trying to specify the destination for the logs as the server that is running your SIEM solution, right? So that's how you're going to collect the logs. Once you define audit policies on your Fortinet, on your Windows server, on your SQL database, and all the other sources, you then send all of these logs to your SIEM solution, which is then going to correlate and make sense of all the vast amount of logs, the millions of logs that are sent. It's going to make sense of these events and throw up alerts for any security event that needs your attention, right? So if it suddenly detects that there was a pattern of events that could mean that suspicious software was installed, it can give you an alert for that, right? So that part is automated. That's why a SIEM solution can be a real value add for your program, right? Because once you actually understood your environment and chosen the log sources and chosen and defined the audit policies, your SIEM solution then takes over to be able to correlate all of these events and give you the alerts for events that need your immediate attention, right? And then because it's collected all of these events, it's also going to be able to archive the collected information so that you can run reports. You can run the daily reports and the periodic reports that are needed for a lot of compliance regulations, right? So in fact, PCI DSS, if any of you are from need to comply with PCI DSS, it requires you to run reports on a daily basis for system events based on their severity, right? So it actually expects you to do this on a daily basis and show continuous ongoing compliance in order to be PCI certified, right? So SIEM solution is going to help you there. It's going to easily do this reporting functionality that is needed for reviewing events, right? A very crucial aspect of several compliance regulations, right? So forensics as well, in terms of once if something goes wrong and you find out that something went wrong a couple of weeks ago, you're going to be able to dive into your archives and then pull out information and then find out exactly what happened, right? So a SIEM solution can still help you if you found out that you had a breach and you need to report details of the breach to the authorities, right? So if you need to report details about a security incident to your auditors, you still need to backtrack what happened, for which you need to jump back into your log data again, right? So that first part is very crucial, where you're able to identify your log systems, the systems that generate logs that are of concern to you, and then define the audit policy and send the logs to the SIEM solution, which is really going to do a lot of things that can help you both in terms of compliance as well as in terms of detecting and responding to attacks, right? So this is the basics of SIEM. So we've looked at some basic ideas, some basic concepts. I have an interesting question from John Newman, right? So he asks just one thing about log collection, in that I said you need to send all your logs to your SIEM solution, right? So John asks, what if that might not be directly possible, right? So I understand this question as you're saying you're not sure that it is possible to access for your SIEM solution to access the particular server and collect the logs, right? So in that case, there are other mechanisms that you can use to collect the logs. You can deploy an agent, right? So we recommend that. because ideally the agentless mechanisms work in terms of if your SIEM solution has permissions to go and access the server that is generating logs, that's great because that helps a lot in terms of ease of deployment. But in case you have a DMZ or you have a server that cannot allow access from a SIEM solution directly, you can deploy an agent that can do the log collection and basic parsing, and the agent can then transfer the event information to the SIEM solution. Right, so interesting question. This is a pretty common concern actually when it comes to deployments. But thank you anyway for noting. So thank you anyway for telling us about this, right? So we will look into this in a bit more detail if you need towards the end of the session. Right. So let's move on to some specifics with SIEM, right? So let's look at reports that you need to run. And before that, I just want to introduce you to Manage Engine Log360, right? So we have two main components that make Log360. We've integrated a tool called Event Log Analyzer and AD Audit Plus, right? So Event Log Analyzer, as the name suggests, is an event log analyzer in terms of it analyzes event logs, not just event logs from the Windows point of view, but rather log data in general, right? So event log analyzer is a heavy duty log management and reporting and alerting solution. And AD Audit Plus, as the name suggests, focuses on the Active Directory side, right? It gives detailed insights into your Active Directory environment. And both of these tools together have been integrated along with a couple of other tools, but we're not going to be focusing on that in today's webinar. And all of these tools come together to give you Manage Engine Log360, which is a comprehensive SIEM solution, right? So I just wanted to mention this. I'm not going to make this a sales pitch and talk more about Log360, but I just wanted to inform you about Log360 in case you hadn't heard of it, because I will from time to time jump into the product. Right, so let's look at examples. Let's look at examples of daily reports that you need to run. So these are what we recommend, and it would be great if you can start doing this first thing tomorrow, right? So events based on severity, right? So this is very important because logs have different severities, right? Critical or warning or error or debug or information, right? So you need to run reports on a daily basis to know how many of each of these categories of severities occur in your environment, right? So if I just jump into the Event Log Analyzer module, right, I'm just going to go to the reporting section. The product actually has a whole bunch of pre-built reports that you can leverage, right? So you can also check this out online at demo.eventloganalyzer.com to just get a general look and feel of the product. Right, so what the product does is it gives you a whole bunch of pre-built reports. So if you look at Windows severity reports, you can see failure events, warning, information, error, and success. Right, so this is very crucial data that you want to know on a daily basis to understand and ensure that there is no misuse. Right, so this reviewing of activity can go a long way in preempting breaches. Right? Because if you're running these reports on a daily basis and reviewing this data, you sort of over time get an idea of the trend of events occurring in your environment. So suddenly one day you see a sharp deviation, you are then able to take a call that, okay, something might have gone wrong and you need to then further investigate. So it's very crucial to get this done on a daily basis, because then you can stop misuse then and there. Right, so you can quickly detect things. If something started happening yesterday and something can potentially go wrong in a couple of days, you'll be able to preempt that by reviewing your logs on a daily basis. Right, so the first important thing to do is to actually segregate these events based on their severity and run reports for each of the severities on a daily basis. Right, so your information or debug events might not be a big concern, but you might want to focus on your critical events, right? So if something like that gets triggered on a given day, you obviously need to go ahead and investigate that, right? So apart from this, of course, you've got login activity. You want to run reports on a daily basis to know who's logging into which critical servers and file servers. You want to know your file activity. You want to run daily reports to know the accesses, modifications, deletions, creations, renames, copies, and all of that. I actually have a screenshot from Log360 that I can show you. And this is essentially a report for all the file changes that have happened over a given time frame. Right? So you can see you've got on the right hand side, you can see file and folder deleted, renamed, moved, modified, created. You can see a whole bunch of other reports on the left hand side, categorizing it based on the user, on the server or process. Essentially, you want to be tracking these things: files created, modified, deleted, moved, renamed, copy, pasted, read access, your permission changes, very crucial, right? Your SACL changes, your failed attempts, right? So this list that you see on the left pane is very crucial when it comes to file activity. And you want to get, again, this data on a daily basis and review this report on a daily basis. Apart from this, you've got firewall traffic, right? You want to track the accepted and denied firewall traffic, right? So your accepted connections, of course, going to be happening in large volumes, denied connections in smaller volumes, but you want to keep track of that as well, because if you're seeing a pattern of repeated denied connections, that could help you preempt a potential security incident, right? So tracking firewall traffic is really important on a daily basis, both your accepted and denied connections, right? So, and apart from that, administrator activity as well, right? So the different changes and different actions that administrators are doing in terms of moving users to different groups, changing some OU settings, changing some group membership settings, computer modifications and things like that, right? So this is very important. You want to run these reports. You want to run these reports on a daily basis again, right? You want to know that administrator A has done these different changes in the last 24 hours, right? So if you find something is creating a security loophole, you'd have to go and revert that. Again, stressing on daily reports. Very crucial to track these things on a daily basis. And you can actually schedule these reports, right? Using a SIEM solution such as Log360. You can have these reports emailed to you so that this is the first thing that you check as part of your security operations on a given day, right? So you can, of course, jump into the product, or whether it's Log360 or any other tool that you may be using, you can go ahead and jump into the product and check these things as a security team, or you can also have them emailed to your inbox so that you can review it even on the go, right? So apart from administrator activity, configuration changes, very important. This again, we look at things like, I just showed you an example of permission changes, and just like that, you have to be concerned about things like your router configuration changes, your firewall rule changes, and things like that, right? So the reason I wanted to show these 6 specific report categories is because these are commonly required for by most organizations, right? You might well have specific requirements in your organization, which a SIEM solution can still help you with. But I wanted to give you some basic events that you can immediately start implementing in your organization, right? You can immediately start doing these things from tomorrow, right? And your organization instantly becomes a little more secure, right? So these are daily reports. Reports are a great way to review activity, make sure everything is up and running the way it should be, and also detect potential misuse before it becomes too late, right? Apart from reports, we've been getting a couple of questions in the meanwhile as well, right? So there are a couple of product specific questions that we've got, right? So we'll just get back to that at the end of the webinar. My apologies for not being able to answer them immediately, right? Bruce is experiencing some small issue with his machine, so he's just trying to get back up and running. So in case you've asked any product specific questions, just hold on for another 10 minutes, and at the end of the session we'll ensure that these questions are answered, right? So reports, right? So these are examples of things that you want to run reports for. Next comes alerts, right? Another very crucial aspect, because alerts essentially are going to be real time and they're going to notify you for something that requires your immediate attention, right? So you have things like multiple failed access attempts, you have account lockouts, you have firewall rule changes, malicious URL requests, a security group membership change, a server being shut down, logs being cleared, right? So these are few examples of things that you can actually set up alerts for using a SIEM solution, right? So in addition to the reports, which are a great way to review activity, you want to set up a lot of these alerts for what we call indicators of compromise, right? Or IOCs, which essentially is to say that if this alert gets triggered, it could be an indicator of compromise in your network, right? So these are basic alerts that you can set up using your SIEM solution. I'm just going to show you an example using Event Log Analyzer again. Just jumping to the alerting section of the product. Just want to show you what it means to set up an alert profile, right? So set up an alert profile essentially means that if this particular event occurs in your network, you want a notification, right? So I'm going to add an alert profile right here. Just give a name for the alert profile. So let's say we want an alert for when a Windows server gets shut down. I'm just going to call it the Windows server shutdown alert. High severity. Select the devices for which you want the alert for. Pretty straightforward. I just want this alert for my Windows group, essentially 7 Windows servers that I've configured. Right. So, and here's the part where you actually choose the alerting criteria, right? You've got to choose and tell your SIEM solution for what event it needs to generate the alert for, right? So if you use a powerful solution such as Log360, you actually will get a whole bunch of pre-built alert profiles, over 1,000 in the case of Log360. So any event that you want an alert for probably is available in as just a pre-built alert profile, which means all you got to do to set up this alert is click the event and say save. That's it, right? So in the case of Windows server shutdown, just going all the way to W here, choose Windows shutdown, and you can see that the criteria gets automatically populated, right? So that's what a tool like Log360 can give you, right? Very easy in terms of deploying and seeing results, right? Because these rules are pre-built into the product. So once you choose Windows Server Shutdown, you just click Save. Then you choose the mode of notification. You choose whether you want an email or an SMS, or you want to run a custom program when the alert gets triggered. You save the profile and you're good to go, right? So it takes about a minute to set up an alert using Log360, right? You just got to choose the event that you want the alert for, and that's it. Choose the event that you want the alert for, and choose the devices on which you want this alert to get triggered for, right? So this is very important in terms of, especially if you have smaller security teams, right? Because you can't go about defining elaborate rules if you have just 2 or 3 people or lesser in your security team, right? So in that case, leveraging the pre-built functionality of a tool really can help you, right? So set up these alerts, right? So once you've got your SIEM solution, ensure that you've scheduled those reports that you saw earlier, and then set up alerts such as the ones that you see in this slide, right? I've given, this is obviously not an exhaustive list. This is obviously not the only 7 alerts that you need, but this is a good starting point in terms of giving you an idea of what kinds of events that you want to track, right? So I would say it would be great if you have those basic reports scheduled and you're reviewing them every day, and you're able to set up as many indicators of compromise as alerts as possible in your environment, right? So these are alerts. So let's just look at an example of before going into streamlined incident response. Let's also look at an example of event correlation, right? Because I showed you an example of alerting scenarios, right, where you choose a particular event and get an alert for that. But what's happened is that with the way things are in today's cybersecurity landscape, these basic alerts alone are not going to cut it, right? So this Windows server shutdown might help you detect when a server gets shut down. But this is obviously not enough because attacks are so advanced. And that is where SIEM solutions have evolved to have powerful correlation engines which have pre-built rules that can detect complex patterns of events, right? So instead of thinking just server shutdown, think of several events that happen and then a server shutdown happens, right? So that entire chain of events might signify something bigger, right? And you need to know that. So correlation engines inside SIEM solutions are essentially able to track a long pattern of events. So if you look at, say, several failed logons followed by a successful logon, which is a classic example of a brute force attack, you essentially can get an alert for this because of the correlation engine, right? The correlation engine is going to be able to track a sequence of events and give you an alert for when a chain of events that resemble an attack occurs in your network. And so let me show you an example. I'm just going to jump to the correlation module and show you an alert that has been triggered by Log360's correlation engine. And so let me give you an example. Let's see an example of, we have a lot of people from Windows backgrounds joining us today. So maybe let's look at a potential Windows threat that the product has detected, right? So suspicious services installed, right? So you can see that the product has raised an alarm for suspicious service installed. And if you actually look at the event timeline, you can actually see the event timeline that the product has tracked, and you can see exactly what has happened. Right? So you can see in this case, there is some kind of brute force activity at around 1748 where a Windows account fails to log on, and this happens several times, right? And then a service is installed on Windows at 1750, and then at 1751 the service is started right after being installed. So all of these events put together between 1748 and 1751, this entire event timeline or event history has together been detected as a potential threat by the product. And this is automatic, right? So this is not something that you have to track individually. The product's intelligence and correlation engine is able to track this entire event timeline from 1748 to 1751 and give you an alert saying suspicious service might have been installed on one of your Windows servers, right? So and then you can go ahead and investigate what happens, because obviously something like this is not a daily occurrence, right? You're not going to keep seeing event timelines such as these on a daily basis. So when they do happen, it could well mean an attack or a compromise is underway, and it allows you to quickly go and respond to the situation, right? So I just wanted to give you this example to say that it's not just important to track single point events, but also to be able to track longer event timelines, such as the one that you see here for suspicious software or service being installed, right? So coming to the towards the end of today's presentation, right, we saw a few reporting scenarios, we saw a few examples of alerts that you want to set up, we even saw a correlation use case. Once you get the alert, your job is not done, right? Because your SIEM solution detects an incident, it gives you an alert. But what you can do to further streamline your incident response is leverage the security orchestration capability and integrate your SIEM solution with a ticketing tool, right? So you may well be using a centralized ticketing tool for your IT and security operations. You may well be using Manage Engine's own help desk tool called Service Desk Boss. So what you can do with the SIEM solution is raise these alerts as tickets on your ticketing tool so that an admin immediately is associated to a particular alarm that's been raised, right? So if an alert for suspicious software installed on your server gets triggered, an admin who's responsible for that server will have a ticket in his name so that there is an accountability in the resolution of the incident, right? So you can see the process, right? An incident gets an incident occurs in your network, the SIEM solution raises an alert, it simultaneously raises a ticket to the administrator who can then go ahead and analyze the incident, respond, and report, right? And KDB essentially is a knowledge database that you can build over time so that you're even further able to reduce the time it takes to respond, right? So it's essentially about reducing the time taken to detect and respond to security incidents. The MTTD, as they say in the industry, the mean time to detect and respond to security incidents. So SIM solution is going to help you reduce the time it takes to detect incidents by giving you these alerts by leveraging its correlation engine. And then it's also going to help you reduce the time it takes to respond by raising the alert as a ticket to the designated administrator, right? And this is something you can do with Log360 as well. You can actually raise the ticket, raise an alert as a ticket to the designated administrator, either based on the device where the alert was triggered or based on the alert profile itself, right? So this is about streamlining incident response. We've had a few more questions. Just bear with me for another 2 to 3 minutes. We're almost done with the presentation part of the session, after which we're going to just dedicate time to answering all your questions on the live chat. Right. So the last part of this presentation, I just want to talk about 2 or 3 latest trends that we've seen in SIM solutions. Right. So you're pretty clear, I'm sure, by now in terms of the objectives of what a SIM solution can do for your security program, and also a few examples and use cases that hopefully you can implement starting tomorrow. Right. So I just wanted to cover a few latest trends. And one of that is threat intelligence, right? And this is something that can help block malicious sources at an early stage, right? Because there are a lot of threat feeds and threat feed providers out there which actually keep analyzing the World Wide Web and identifying and creating a database of known malicious sources and domains and callback servers, right? So SIM solutions, a lot of them come integrated with threat feeds, which is a great plus because that gives you additional security by helping you block a whole bunch of malicious sources at the firewall level itself, right? So this is something that you can do. Especially useful if you're evaluating new age SIM solutions, right? You can check on their threat intelligence capability. The next thing is user behavior analytics, and this is very an example of using machine learning to actually help your security program, right? Because what UBA does is that it allows you to detect anomalies in user behavior, right? So Log360 does that as well. And what it does is, for example, say a particular user normally comes into work between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., but suddenly on one particular day at 11 p.m. in the night tries to copy sensitive data from a file server, the user behavior analytics module of the product can actually detect that as a sharp deviation from his normal behavior and then report that as or raise that as an alert to you, right? So that could be malicious, right? If someone is trying to access something late at night when they normally work between 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., right? So this is something that is an interesting development in SIM. A lot of the good SIM solutions today have started to incorporate user behavior analytics as part of their portfolio, right? And then, of course, cloud infrastructure auditing. And we made a point about this a little earlier, saying that you still have to get logs from your cloud environments because there's a lot of interaction of users and data happening there as well, right? Because we often, when we think of SIM, we think of it being an on-premises thing, and we think of monitoring the on-premise interactions of users and data. But a lot of these interactions happen on the cloud in your Office 365, your Exchange Online, your AWS, your Azure, your Salesforce cloud, right? So all of these things sometimes slip our mind when it comes to SIM. And this is something that SIM solutions have been addressing lately in terms of providing monitoring capability for cloud platforms in addition to on-premises software, right? So this is again something that Manage Engine Log360 has done. In fact, these 3 areas are what we are focusing on in terms of product development today, right? Threat intelligence, we're trying to get more threat intelligence feeds integrated with the product. We're trying to improve upon the user behavior analytics, trying to build more complex machine learning algorithms so that we can detect anomalies such as the one that I talked about. And we've been extending capabilities for public cloud auditing as well. We've integrated an Office 365 auditing component, an Azure and AWS and Salesforce monitoring component. So all of these tools come together essentially to give Log360, right? So that you get complete visibility into all the resources in your network, right? So I'm not going to keep continuing talking about Log360. This brings me to the last part of my presentation, which is the questions bit. We've started answering your questions on the live chat. Just bear with us for a minute or two and your questions shall be answered. I guarantee you. So once again, just want to thank all of you for taking time off from your busy schedules and making this event a success. We've been overwhelmed with the interactions on live chat. So thank you so much for that as well. We'll be answering questions now for the next 5 to 10 minutes. We hope you found this event useful. Do leave your feedback at the end of the webinar. Once you quit, just take a moment or two to let us know what you liked or didn't like about today's webinar. And also if you have any suggestions on how we can improve or for any future topics that you want to discuss. Right? Apart from that, thank you so much for joining us and have a great day ahead.